Joining me now is Congresswoman Debbie Dingell of Michigan. Congresswoman, it's great to have you back on the show. There was a great, I have to say, quote from the judge at hearing this census case after that tweet went out, basically, where the DOJ lawyer had to come back and say, I don't know anything else, Your Honor, aside from what he just tweeted on this. Do you think there is a legal path for the president to add the citizenship question to the census at this late hour?
I think it's going to be challenged. I know it will be challenged if he does try to add it. One of the things that really concerns me is people are forgetting what the census is about, which is really trying to get an accurate count of who is in this country. He's succeeding. No matter what, he's probably got two different goals, but he is making people afraid to participate in a census when we need to, legitimate American citizens who are going to be afraid to participate in this census. And that's what worries me, because this census is supposed to be an accurate count of who is here and matters for the states and local governments.
Well, I was going to say it's also remarkably important for the makeup of
the
US
Congress
House
for redistricting. So obviously the makeup of the Congress and redistricting is important, so that may be helping him in one way where he's trying to discourage. But I also think that it really depends. The education dollars, the health care dollars, the dollars that are going to the states are also dependent on these numbers. It is who we are, and this census matters.
Yeah. While you're here, I also want to ask you about the incredibly contentious vote in the House of Representatives around the additional funding to try and address this horrible migrant crisis at the border. Obviously, Democrats were dramatically split in the House over whether there were enough, frankly, protections for the way that the money was going to be used. Were you yourself conflicted about how to vote on this bill?
You know, I didn't know what I was going to do probably until the last 15 seconds. I knew that we could not leave without getting money to those detention centers. We had to get money there. I did vote against it, ultimately because I was not satisfied that we were not setting enough guidelines. You know, we've been gone for a week, and during that week, we've seen new Inspector General studies. We saw the New York Times report today, which is just, I mean, we've heard these stories, but it gave it to everybody about what's happening, the inhumane conditions of these children and what's happening. We need to do something about that, and I hope as we come back this week that Republicans and Democrats are going to understand that we have to do something. We have to set standards for what is happening.
There, in particular, was a divide from the progressive wing of the caucus, which essentially got rolled on this topic in favor of more moderate members. And Nancy Pelosi was quoted in Maureen Dowd's column in the New York Times this week as saying, quote, all these people, referring to this, specifically these four congresswomen, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, Rashida Tlaib, Ilhan Omar, and Ayanna Pressley, all these people have their public whatever and their Twitter world, but they didn't have any following. They're four people, and that's how many votes they got. Now, this has, of course, caused AOC to respond that the public whatever is called public sentiment. Wielding the power to shift it is how we actually achieve meaningful change in this country. This seems like a significant, sharp exchange between two women, very high-profile women in the caucus who had a relatively, they'd had a détente, at least in public. How problematic is this?
You know, I think we're going to come back this week. We have to, as a party, figure out how we're going to work with each other. I actually know Rashida very well. I've known Rashida for 20 years, and we talk a lot. We're willing to, hey, I have a very different style than Rashida does. But you can't dismiss somebody. Well, the following that all four of these women have, it is quite big, and probably more than 100 members have in another way. I think that Rashida will say to me, I agitate, you sit at the table and solve the problem. Now, they got to come to the table and solve the problem. And I said, and they are part of solving the problem. Our caucus is successful because we are so diverse, but in our diversity, we have to make sure we don't act like Republicans. We got to figure out a way we're going to come together and solve problems.
How much of this divide do you think is potentially going to impact the incredibly difficult battles down the road? I mean, you have to, lift the debt ceiling, keep the government running in September, and there seems to be a sense from progressives that they don't want to let their leaders tell them what to do on that.
So there have to be discussions. None of us are going to be told what we're going to do. We each represent our district, and our job is to represent that district in the Congress. I think we need to look at what happened before we left. It wasn't pretty. And I am hopeful that members are going to come together and figure out how we listen to each other, at the table and continue. If we don't figure out how we're going to work together, we're not going to make the progress that we need to make. And there are quite a few things that we've got to make progress on.
And do you think there's a realization from progressive members of the caucus on that point? I mean, do they feel like if they go too far, they're doing more damage than good?
I don't. I think that progress. You know, John Dingell used to say compromise is not a dirty word, and he was certainly known as being a progressive on many issues. I think I talk to people a lot. We got to listen to each other. We got to put each other in each other's shoes. Sometimes people like to really attack each other. If we're going to solve problems, we got to work together, and we make progress. Progressive is progress. We got to make progress together.
All right, Congresswoman Debbie Dingell, always great to see you. Thanks very much.